But for me, after 30 years of working in this space, for me, at the very core of sustainability is understanding interconnectedness. For example, what we build determines how much we use our cars. If those cars are internal combustion engine cars, they're creating pollutants, damaging our health, contributing to climate change, supporting the oil industry, which also creates single-use plastics, ending up in the oceans, filling our fish up with plastics. If we choose to eat those fish, we fill ourselves up with microplastics, and that's probably going to damage our health. But it's also killing penguins on the other side of the world. So everything is interconnected, but we don't really have the tools to visualize or manage those connections. So next slide. And really that we need to, I think, move away from tackling issues in silos. I mean, we are tearing our hair out, for example, trying to solve the cost of living crisis in a way which just makes the climate emergency worse. So can we actually take a deep breath, get out of that confusion, and really think about what are the outcomes we want to achieve? How do those fit together? How do we link health, climate, pollution, jobs, everything together, renewable energy, and how can we pull together to create the world we need and want? So next slide. So I've been really excited by this particular campaign led by my colleagues Neve and Tash, but involving lots of young leaders. And so for me today, I'm really keen to see how can we connect across the generations, what can we learn from each other, and how can we help, in this particular case, local governments deliver more joined up climate plans. So, it's very easy to say, local governments, you need to do more, but we know they're under a lot of pressure. So how can we help them? How can we help them be more joined up? How can we work with them to be more joined up? But also, how can we, as individuals, as community groups, as companies, help them deliver these climate strategies? So I'm really keen today to explore that and see what comes out of today and then beyond today into 2024. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Puran. Yeah, so some really important points there, actually. This idea of not necessarily doing more, but doing things more efficiently, more interconnectedly. And I think that's probably a fantastic segue to move on to COP28 and some of our expectations around what we hope to see across 2024. So let's get started with that part of today's session. I will introduce Professor Mike Berners-Lee to talk a little bit again about yourself, Mike, and what your reflections have been so far on COP28.
Okay, thank you, Masha, and it's great to be on this call. So just quickly about me, I have a few different hats, really. I'm a very part-time professor at Lancaster University, doing stuff around sustainability and carbon footprints and food systems and stuff. I run a business called Small World Consulting, which exists to help organizations to make an appropriate response to the climate and ecological emergency, by which we mean increasingly asking that question with a very wide-angled lens, because as Puran's made clear, it's an incredibly multidimensional and systemic challenge that requires an incredibly holistic approach. And every now and again, I write books, as it says there on the slide, and my last one was There's No Planet B, which is really putting climate change in the context of a wider climate emergency. So onto the a wider ecological emergency, onto the subject of the COPs. So I think that, as with a lot of my work, the important thing to do is to stand back and keep hold of the big picture perspective on what's going on here. So for decades now, the science has been crystal clear on climate change, at least in the broad picture, that this is a big deal and it's something that humans absolutely need to get on top of. And so we've had 28 of these huge international conferences to get on top of the challenge. Let's have a look at the bottom line of how effective the first 27 of those, at least, have been. So here's a graph of carbon emissions from fossil fuel use. And you can see the little thin blue line there marks the first one of those COPs. And by the way, I'm not saying anything I'm about to say to be depressing, but I think it's really, really important that we understand accurately, neither exaggerating nor underplaying the state of progress, so that we can maximize our effectiveness. So, if you were on another planet looking at how we're getting on climate, you wouldn't see any evidence from this curve at all. No evidence at all that humans have noticed that climate change is a big thing, or is anything at all. You'd see some ups and downs in our lives, like oil crises and pandemics and so on, and a financial crisis, but you wouldn't spot that we'd notice climate change. So why is that we're getting, in sort of absolute physical terms, in terms of our response to the climate crisis, nowhere whatsoever? So next slide. Well, one way of understanding it is that there's been some incredibly well-funded, sophisticated, very cynical lobbying and influencing of every kind you can think of from the fossil fuel industry. It's continuing today. It's probably more sophisticated, more well-funded, and its presence at the COP this year was stronger than ever. And I think my take on it would be that that lobby group is strong enough that it will, and it's following the template that was really developed for them by the tobacco industry, who worked out what it takes to fend off science that's uncomfortable for your industry. And they have succeeded in creating a situation where, as far as I can see, at the moment, policymakers around climate are allowed to say and do anything they like, as long as it won't succeed in leaving the fossil fuel in the ground. And there's been every kind of greenwashing, corruption, and fake news alongside this. And this COP that we've just had has, as I say, the strongest lobbying we've ever seen from the fossil fuel industry. It's chaired by somebody who's been doing oil deals along the side whilst running the COP, and who has been overheard saying that he doesn't really believe that the case for limiting fossil fuel extraction is scientifically proven at all. So the whole thing, I'm afraid we have to say, is possibly doing more harm than good, because it creates a sense of, it's got gravitas. It takes all the people who care about climate, get involved in it. They put all their energy into it. And if you want to subvert that process, actually, if you can make sure that the COP doesn't actually achieve anything that will succeed in limiting the fossil fuel extraction, then you've won completely, because the COP is where all the energy has gone into. So I think we need to recognize this. Is it that COPs can't ever do anything? No, I don't think that's the case. The question to ask is, what are the conditions under which the COPs could become, for the first time, effective? And I think that's to do with systemic change. It's to do with the big global wake up. Puran talked about how systemic and joined up everything is, and how multidisciplinary the whole challenge is, and he's absolutely bang on. So the question for all of us is, what can we do to help create the conditions under which the world can wake up to the climate and wider ecological emergency, and the COPs, for example, can become effective? And that takes us into a whole load of questions. It takes us into high quality decision making. It takes us into questions of how can we create a more honest environment in which there's a reward for honesty and a price for dishonesty, which we don't have in place properly at the moment. And I think, for everyone on this call, the question is to ask is, what can I do to help create the environment in which the world is waking up and the quality of decision making is such that we can start to get on top of these challenges? And it won't look, I don't think it will look as though there's one particular actor that makes all the difference. I think it will feel as though the change happens from everywhere at once, because that is how a kind of multifaceted, multidisciplinary transformation, systemic transformation takes place. That must be my 5 minutes. I'll stop.
Thank you, Mike. We'll move on. Some really important points there. Holly, your thoughts?
Hi there, my name's Holly. I'm really excited to be speaking on the panel today. I've been working in sustainability for a relatively short time, only 3 years, so I'm coming in still very early in my career with lots of energy and passion, and I'm working in kind of sustainable business management and, helping companies to take on more of the responsibility and taking it out of the consumer's hands a little bit more. And I was one of the young leaders on the One Planet mind mapping tool, which you're going to hear a lot more about later today. So I won't go into too much detail, but I will say I had a wonderful experience, and I think the tool is a really important tool for getting local government climate plans into a singular format that can be easily compared, analysed, learnt from, and hopefully improved. So yeah, thank you to the One Planet team and Paul Ram for that experience. I really enjoyed it, and I'm excited to see what they do next with it. I've also been asked to share my thoughts on COP and COP28 today, and I'm afraid I'm also coming with a bit of a cynical point of view. Although I appreciate that, it's one of the most important conferences. It's one of the only conferences that we have really, where all the kind of world leaders come together to discuss climate action plans. There's just a real sense of frustration. I think a lot of the younger generation are sharing that, a real sense of frustration and a loss of faith in our leadership, in CEOs, in world leaders. It seems to be the question of whether we're really there to solve climate solution plans, or are we there to just uphold social and economic power. I think it's very disappointing to see that the presidency was given to Dr. Al Jaber, who's the CEO of the Abu Dhabi National Oil Company. I find it very hard to believe that someone in his position, even with the best of intentions, is really able to make the change and decision that's needed in terms of the fossil fuel conversation and phasing out fossil fuels. And this year alone, I think the number of delegates, sorry, let me just find the number. Yeah, it's more than 2,400 people from the fossil fuel lobbyists had access this year, which is 4 times more than last year. So kind of similar sentiment there to Mike, that it's becoming more and more accessible for the fossil fuel industry to kind of get in and give their opinion and weight on these conversations where they maybe shouldn't be so involved. I do believe it's important that they have a seat at the table, of course, because they have a lot to answer for. They have very deep pockets. They have some of the most incredible engineers and minds in their industry. And if that money and those resources were used towards, creating transformational change, then that would be incredible. But that's not what they choose to do, which we saw quite plainly in the last few years with the oil crisis. So yeah, I think it's just frustrating to see that there's lots of talking going on and maybe not as much action needed. It was really, it was really impressive on the first day when we got that through the funding for loss and damages, but there's still a massive gap in the money that does actually need to be given, and the quality of that money as well isn't quite right yet. So I don't know whether those were put through early on to give people a false sense of optimism, to say sort of look at what we're doing, and hoping that people wouldn't really look at the small print and see kind of what was going on. And I think, I don't know if everyone else has seen the young Indian protester, the 12-year-old girl that came on and interrupted the talks. And you can just hear the sheer panic and outcry in her voice, because, yeah, for young people, this really is, our future and the planet that we're going to be living on. And I think, we're almost 30 years in now to these conferences. And as you saw on the previous slides, the change that's been talked about just simply isn't coming into effect. So even with good intentions and coming together in talks, the change that is needed isn't happening. So there does need to be a systemic change. I think young people need to have a much stronger, clearer voice in these conferences. And I think, also, I felt quite dismayed as well at Rishi Sunak's speech in his press conference. I thought it was very self-congratulating, and kind of he came with this, opinion of the UK is doing so well, and it wasn't of the sentiment at all of what COP is meant to be about, which is meant to be about collaboration and us all coming together to work together. I felt like he was sort of sitting on a bit of a high horse there and pointing fingers at other countries, and just kept talking about how well the UK is doing, following his retractions in September on green. Sorry, that's my time up. I left that on there just to make sure that I didn't go over.
Thank you, Polly. I just wanted to add there, I think some really great points around frustrations as well, and a young leader perspective. Thank you. Melissa, shall we move on to some of your insights as well? Yeah, thank you. So my name's Melissa Zanocco, and I'm head of the Infrastructure Client Group. And I just wanted to start by saying how honoured I am to be involved in this event and the work that the young leaders have been doing to systems map the local government climate strategies. And I also want to talk about global systemic challenges. So what do I mean by that? Well, by systemic, I'm meaning that an intervention on one part of the system can have consequences that can be good or bad, or intended or unintended, in another part of the system. So there's no one party that can resolve the challenge, and we need to be connecting, convening and coordinating to find solutions. And what global, because those systems are across the world, whether that's through global supply chains or the global south feeling repercussions from actions from the global north. And what do I think are the key global systemic challenges that we're facing in the world? So obviously the one today, climate mitigation, that's to stop climate change. But there's also climate resilience, and that's to prepare us for the damage that climate change is already creating. There's biodiversity to repair the planet. There's a transition to a circular economy to ensure the planet and humanity's future for generations to come. And there's social equity so that we don't leave anyone behind. So obviously today's the last day of COP, where the global leaders and the climate activists have been connecting and convening and coordinating. But that's just to tackle the first issue. That's just the climate mitigation. And then there are other meetings like the Convention on Biological Diversity or COP for Biodiversity. And there's things like the World Circular Economy Forum that look at two of the others. And I was actually at the World Circular Economy Forum in Helsinki in June. And because I was launching our shared understanding, a circular economy for the built environment. And that was the result of bringing together representatives from both the built environment sector and the circular economy community from across the globe to agree core principles to help align strategies, policy and action so that we can all move in the same direction. So I wasn't actually at COP in person, but I have been following the process, and I have attended some bits virtually, especially those that I was involved with, like the Industrial Deep Decarbonisation Initiative, particularly around decarbonising concrete. And I'm not actually going to comment on any of the controversial issues because, you know, we've heard other people's views and we can read about them. We have our own opinions. But what I wanted to focus on is how important it is to have coordinated global action because of the systemic nature of these issues, and to also encourage us to think about the countries and the populations that are most vulnerable to climate change, because in some senses they can't ignore or give up on COP, and they're actually depending on those crucial funds that were just mentioned from the global north for adaptation and mitigation and reparation. And we also know that women, children and Indigenous people are most impacted by climate change, and yet they're not adequately represented in the leadership and the policy writing to tackle it. And thirdly, sort of again following on from what people are saying, that there are some who would actually prefer for us to give up on initiatives like COP just when we're running out of time to make these really important decisions. Whereas it's each of us has to choose to take action on an individual level, kind of in our lives, our own homes, and at work, whether that be through like what we eat or how we get around, recycling or decisions that we make at work. So in some ways, my hope is that some of the more shocking behaviour at COP actually encourages people that it's actually up to us to behave responsibly and make a difference, rather than waiting for someone else to do it. And that kind of leads me on to why I'm so excited about the young leaders' work to map the 50 local government climate strategies and the recommendations that they've offered. Because I believe that as well as transitioning to a circular economy, the future economic model will include place-based decision making. So we do need these global and national level priorities and strategies and roadmaps, but the solutions will be different depending on the unique location. And therefore, like local authorities have got a critical role to play in the UK, but they often don't have the staff or skills or capabilities or funding to achieve the potential benefits. And they're also set up in silos and don't have obvious ways of knowing what's happening across the country or learning from each other's best practice. So I think it's great that the young leaders have done this to highlight where the gaps are, but also where the best practice is. And what I liked the most about the recommendations is that they highlight that interconnectedness of those 5 global systemic issues that I've just highlighted.
and they're looking at ways to simultaneously address and communicate the co-benefits more clearly. And they're also advocating to help build resilience as a whole society, not just in the segments of society. And also this point of needing to connect and convene and coordinate across public, private and community organisations. So I'll just end by saying that our shared understanding that I mentioned was a follow-up to our vision for the built environment. And that states that the explicit purpose of the built environment is to enable people and nature to flourish together for generations. And so my hope is that the pledges, that the official and unofficial ones that come out of COP and the recommendations from the young leaders are going to sort of take us forward as swiftly as possible to try and make it a reality. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Melissa. Wow, what an important note to end on. And actually, I think it's been quite nice having such honest responses from the panel. Again, I'm sure a lot of us share those sentiments. So really looking at where, you know, some of the things actually are quite controversial. And to Mike's point about if you were an alien looking down, what would you learn about what humans are actually doing about climate change? But then Melissa's point about the importance of a platform to really have these discussions globally, and Holly landing somewhere in the middle. So thank you all. You should all see a pop-up on your screen now, or slowly coming up at some point, really asking you what your views are, so we can get a bit of a pulse check around whether you're optimistic about COP28's potential impact through 2024. So hopefully that poll will come up shortly, but while we are waiting for that, we also have an opportunity for questions to the speakers who did a fantastic job of covering their reflections. So you can raise your hand, unmute yourself to ask a question, or if you have got a question that you just want to put in the chat, please do as well, and we'll put that through to them. So has anyone got any burning questions or any reflections off of COP28 that they want to share with the group as well? Okay, Donna, I see a hand raised. Do you want to unmute yourself?
Yeah, thank you. I work at Quran a bit, and I'm a local councillor, ex-business person, etc. And my question really is of Mike, who I'm a great fan of, although I've never had the pleasure of meeting him. So what is our solution if COP is it's not working? Obviously, it's just a conference, it's not a through line. So how can we fix it? Because we know that from health and well-being, and as well as from climate and biodiversity, we're in a lot of trouble. So what's your solution?
Okay. Well, I totally agree with Melissa that we need a process. I mean, the world needs to cooperate at the global international level in a way that humans have never had to do before, and it's unproven whether we're capable of it, right? But it's required. It's absolutely required. So how to get the COP working is the question. It's not how to do away with the COP, it's how to get it working. And so the first thing is, when it's not working, we've got to call it out that it's not working, right? And it's completely not working. And we need to be absolutely crystal clear that it's a load of, excuse the expression, it is a load of BS at the moment, okay? And we should all be saying that and screaming that we need better. And going into the next COP, we need to create an environment in which every delegate from every country knows that their career depends on them bringing home the goods, right? So at the moment we have an environment where, Rishi Sunak could go and he could go and make his speech. We need to have an environment where if you make a speech like that, you come back and you're just booed on the streets and embarrassed off the face of it, right? We've got to have every country needs to be clear. And every delegate from every country needs to know that everybody's pushing them. So in a way, it's like the leadership doesn't come from that process. The leadership comes from us, the people, proving that we care enough.
Thank you, Mike. Melissa, do you want to add to that point there as well?
Yeah, just to say that I agree with you, Mike, but I also feel the time pressure. And I feel a little bit that people are waiting for when we've got the perfect politicians, the right amount of money, the right, everything's sort of going right. And it's obviously, you can see from your own graph, it's not going to happen. So I believe what I call the invisible army, which is the people like us in here who have a lot of power. And I do think there are things happening at COP And that's why I said unofficial as well. So I do think that there are people that are doing amazing things, you know, including One Planet, which is why I'm saying the stuff that the young leaders doing. And so I think it's very much about us getting behind the people that are doing amazing stuff and creating tipping points and creating movements. And I think that change happens in a lots of ways. It's not through one route. So governments and policy and things is one route, and it's very important. And there are lots of other routes. But also we kind of know that governments have knee-jerk reactions to things. So if you have something like Extinction Rebellion, suddenly it's on everyone's agenda for a few weeks and things. So they are actually important as well. So it's all these different parts. And so I think that I agree with you, Mike, but don't wait, I suppose, is what my message is. And really, really believe in your own power. Like literally go out and buy yourself a superhero cloak today and put it on in the morning and just know how powerful you are, because I cannot tell you how powerful you are. There's so much that you can do.
Oh, I absolutely love that. I need to find somewhere where I can get a cape, Melissa, but I'm sure we could all benefit from a bit of self-empowerment. So, Holly, do you have any additional final thoughts on that from a young leader perspective? We've had a question come in specifically around who do we call out? So, who are the main players here that need to be identified, and what are your thoughts on that?
I think the people in the highest positions of power that have the most impact, their decisions have the most impact. I completely agree with Melissa, and I love that analogy of, you know, wearing a cape, putting your cape on in the morning and heading out and doing everything you can in your personal power. And I do think that there's a lot to be said for individual action and, you know, individual businesses and individual governments. But yeah, it really needs to come from the countries and the leaders that have the most power, that have maybe made the most impact and have the most to answer for, that their decisions have the leverage to make as much change as possible in the shortest amount of time possible. Because that's really what we need. We need urgency and we need action. And although all those small, tiny individual actions do definitely compound to, you know, sense of community and cultural changes over years and generations, I just don't think we have that time left. We need people with the power to make immediate decisions. They need to have the confidence to maybe go against the social norms or do something that their shareholders might not be so happy about, but, you know, is in the greater benefit of the planet. So yeah, I think it's the people at the top that need to be held accountable. Like Mike said, they need to be booed in the streets if they're caught making speeches like that. So yeah.
Thank you, Holly. Yeah, so I think this is probably the perfect opportunity, Ben, to share our poll with everybody and get a sense of what everybody's saying. So looks like the majority is somewhat pessimistic. That's better than very pessimistic, but really does sort of highlight here that to your graph, Mike, that unfortunately people aren't just, that we're not seeing the action translated across these conversations. And I think really we need this injection of hope back into COP across 2024, whether that be at the sort of high decision-making level that Holly was mentioning, or actually just across individual and community level as well. There needs to be more of a joined up approach. So I think that's probably, again, a good opportunity to move on to the next part of today's session. There will be another opportunity to ask more questions to our leaders. But actually this point, and I'll let the One Planet team talk a little bit more about the project. Here is actually a piece of action that we can look at, something practical that's taken away some of these thoughts, worked with young people and beyond to really put pen to paper and tell us what we need to do next. So I will pass on to Neve from One Planet to tell us a little bit more about the project.
Hi everyone, my name's Neve. I'm a senior consultant at One Planet. I've worked with the company for 2 years now, and me and my colleague Tash have kind of co-led this campaign that I'm sure you've all heard lots about. I mean, it's why we're all kind of here today. So over the past couple of months, we've been running the Unite for UK Climate Action campaign. The aim of this campaign was to bring together a group of young leaders to volunteer to help us create a systems map of UK climate policy using the One Planet platform. We wanted to provide a national picture of what each local government was doing to reduce carbon emissions and adapt to climate change. The systems map helps to identify best practice, understand where there are gaps, but most importantly, identify opportunities for local governments to develop their actions further to deliver co-benefits around health, nature recovery, and equity. So we worked collaboratively with the young leaders to form a set of recommendations which we feel local governments should be implementing to amplify their impact in response to the climate crisis. But ultimately, what we hope this piece of work will encourage is for local councils, local businesses and communities to actually come together and work together to create and deliver effective joined up solutions. So we decided to run this campaign in parallel to this year's United Nations COP28 with a focus on youth participation and leadership, because as we've kind of actually already heard through the session, the youth voice is often left out of these major discussions and instead given to fossil fuel lobbyists, which is not great. So really what we wanted to do was empower young people in the UK to have the opportunity to learn about the climate crisis, what is being done in response, and to kind of provide a vehicle for their thoughts to be shared. And how we did this was, the campaign has been running now for the past couple of months since we started in October. We reached out to our networks and universities to engage young people in the campaign. Over 100 people signed up and nearly 50 climate action plans have been mapped on the One Planet platform. We hope to kind of keep working and running this until pretty much all of the UK local government's climate action plans are mapped. But each volunteer received 2 hours of training to equip them with the skills that they needed to transform their assigned local government's climate action plan into an action plan on the One Planet system, as you can see here. So each plan gets translated into our common node structure of outcomes, what they want to achieve, actions detailing how they will achieve them, and indicators to measure the progress of the outcome or action. The plans can be viewed either through the One Planet Living principle lens or the COP28 lens, so that you can see how the activity relates to this year's themes. These lenses allow us to visually understand what areas of sustainability are being addressed and which need more attention. Each young leader reviewed their assigned climate action plan, assessing where they saw strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities to improve. We also wanted our young leaders to create recommendations at a more national level, using different tools in the One Planet platform to form them. So in our system, we have what we call shared outcomes, which are used to create the shared sustainability vision of any organization, region, or community. For the context of this campaign, the shared outcomes were kind of key goals that we felt local councils should be aiming to achieve in terms of carbon reduction, climate adaptation, health, equity, nature recovery, and more. These shared outcomes get adopted into each plan, not only to connect the plans together, but to communicate how each plan is contributing to each of these goals and where there are gaps. The other tool which supported our young leaders to form their recommendations was the search tool. So this allows you to search the entire system by node type, plan, and lens category. You can also type in keywords to see all data relating to that term. For example, I think Ben has searched tree for us. And then our connections overview tool enables you to see all activity surrounding that particular node. So it kind of allows you to explore some of the key actions that and outcomes that are being taken. And then we ran a series of recommendation sessions with the young leaders where we used the One Planet platform in this way to explore the existing UK local climate policy that relates to each of this year's COP28 themes. These sessions were used to collaboratively form a set of recommendations that reflected how young people would like local governments to respond to the climate crisis. I will now pass to my colleague Tash so that she can go through some of the recommendations and key findings.
Thank you. Also, I've just posted the link to the published workspace. So everything that's completed is accessible if you want to have an explore, see if your local climate strategy is already mapped. But yeah, I'll get on with the recommendations now. So yeah, Neve's gone over sort of the process, why we were doing it and how. I'm going to share with you some of the most ambitious and sort of systems change oriented recommendations that the young leaders have made following their analysis. This was actually a very exciting part for me because we didn't know what the results would be. That was the whole point of this project. We didn't know what the analysis would show or what the young leaders would recommend. So it really is like championing youth voice and putting our brains together, see what we could find, basically. So some of these recommendations are very overarching. They sort of address the changes required to transition to a more sustainable future, or even to make that possible. They're sort of pulling together existing and future strategies, working collaboratively to address multiple complex challenges all at once. But then on the other hand, we've got some recommendations which are very like directly implementable, looking at existing best practices across the local government climate strategies, encouraging further uptake of those best practices and development of those best practices. Basically looking across the fragmented landscape of strategies and seeing what we already know as a collective to share that information quicker. So if we get on with it, enough rambling. Essentially, the key recommendation is that we need to be able to communicate co-benefits of specific directed action more effectively. So therefore, the young leaders have highlighted the importance of good health and well-being and equity to be embedded within strategies as like core elements. So not thinking in silos, which is our whole thing, but basically thinking more holistically about health, about equity, and about climate action and resilience and adaptation and risk mitigation and so on. So if we have a look at the systems map of the manifesto recommendations we put together, I don't know if it's on screen already. Yeah. We can understand how the elements within it are related, which are more interwoven and therefore offer opportunities for co-benefits. So you can see actually at the core, it sort of looks like a central node is the outcome equity to be embedded into all policy and strategy, which therefore addresses intersectional risk factors, which impact like the quality of life. And therefore by addressing them, you're building resilience as a whole society rather than segments of society. So it's really to do with like a just transition outcome. It's through the links you can understand that it's like linked to achieving other outcomes. So therefore it suggests that it's embedded in our sustainable vision for the future, and is like core to actually achieving that. You can see some others on screen. Nature for All is another one, lots of links coming off of it. I can't read it from here, but basically the ones with lots and lots of links. Vulnerable residents, oh yeah. Vulnerable residents supported is another one. So yeah, actually in the manifesto, there's an outcome called vulnerable residents are supported, which means that to ensure a just transition towards this climate resilient economy and a low carbon society, residents will need to be supported equitably. So in practice, this means like prioritizing residents who are more vulnerable to the effects of climate change. They might lack the financial resources to adapt appropriately or any other number of risk factors. Councils, including Swale Borough and Wigan Council, we found had great policy examples which engage both at council level, business and community to achieve equitable climate resilience. So they're sort of ones that we would say are doing best practice given what we've already analysed. Also, it's worth saying here that the young leaders recommend that local governments need to be prepared for the inevitable influx of climate refugees that will travel to the UK. And they also need to have measures in place to welcome those refugees and sort of make this country better for it. So to do this, we're going to move on to another core recommendation, which is to work collaboratively. Not sure where it is on the, no, it's on the edge, but it should be more in the centre actually. But why? Well, it's because local governments' direct emissions account for only a few % of their regional emissions. So therefore, any net zero target is going to require collaboration internally and externally. There is precedent for how this can work. For example, the Wellbeing of Future Generations Wales Act, which is in law requiring public bodies to it's like integrate long-term impacts of their decisions, work with people and communities, and prevent persistent problems, including poverty, health inequality, and climate change. within their strategy. So we could look to that law in Wales for improving our collaboration. More practically than those that I've covered so far, we can look at nature-based solutions which can support climate action, mitigate risk, and support climate adaptation, and then also provide recreational resources supporting equity and health. Again, this is all interwoven, which makes sense. Councils should deliver nature-based solutions which improve local nature resilience to climate change, and improving the stability of potential net sources of CO2. So, for example, protecting and enhancing woodlands and wetlands would be a great start. We also looked at the Young Leaders recommended prioritising types of risk mitigation and adaptation measures, like those nature-based solutions which address heat island effect, air quality, flooding and food security. And they actually recommend that these are embedded into the climate action plan more deeply. An example of good practice is Hackney Council, which has converted so far 1,400 square metres of road space into rain gardens, which is improving resilience or reducing risk factors involved with flooding, and also increasing wildlife diversity and improving access to nature, even in a small way. There's other examples of that.
Tash, thank you so much for covering. I think a lot of these case studies. No, it's actually really useful. I'm sure a lot of people on the call will agree that the fact that just by a click of a button you can share case studies from all across the country of best practice, particularly for those in local authority, is hugely valuable. And I think it would be great to hear from Jack as well, as a young leader working on this, what your experience was and sort of key takeaways you found as part of the project.
So can I begin now?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Thanks, Masha. And good afternoon, dear environmental advocates. I'm Jack. I'm a first-year undergraduate studying business management in Durham University, and I have the privilege of being deeply involved in the COP28 mapping system project with the One Planet team. My journey with One Planet group began through a fortuitous meeting with CEO Paul Desai back in my high school during 2022, after which him and his team helped me conducted the sustainable farming transformation analysis. I was drawn to the company's innovative approach in tracking, mapping, and aligning environmental projects, and Paul's excellent leadership. This alignment of my personal values with One Planet principles and mission, which fueled my enthusiasm and commitment to take actions to build resilient communities under this climate change. So, well, in this project, my role linked Durham University's environmental activists with One Planet. We use One Planet's method for detailed analysis, making such complex tasks manageable. I led an excellent and diverse team, including Hassan Khan, Safar Hancock, Patrick Damis, Henry Morris, Marco, Julia Joe, and Boris. And well, the school organizations involved, including Castle Environment, EcoDU, DU Climate Society, Adding Green Space, John Snow Environment, as well as professors like Dr. Nora, I think she's in the meeting, which I'm super excited, Dr. Nell and Dr. Scott. Together, we examined climate initiatives for Durham and Darlington councils. So we focus on energy efficiency, community engagement, and we identified improvement areas like community involvement in, let's say, water conservation. So as this team leader, I fostered a collaborative environment. So valuing each member's skills, we navigated challenges by respecting diverse perspectives, which led to thorough, actionable findings. We identified key strengths such as target of their strategies and their focus on carbon emissions and climate resilience. So in particular, we discovered that both Durham County Council and Darlington Borough Council have actions such as improvement to house insulation to improve energy efficiency and engagement with schools and communities to increase social awareness. We did, however, identify areas for improvement. To be more specific on social justice considerations. So our recommendations include specific action, maybe like involving the community in sustainable practices. In this regard, we believe One Planet and UK businesses can work together to support local governments and assist achieving net zero targets. So in conclusion, me and my teammates believe these evaluations not only help refine local government strategies, but also set a precedent of how academic and practical insights can work together and to create really impactful environmental policies. So this project personally provided me and I would say my teammates with invaluable insights into the intricacies of environmental planning at the government level. And overall, me and my teammates are deeply appreciated. So for further recommendation, so we believe achieving the net zero target actually is a collective thing. It's an endeavor requiring global cooperation to succeed, to broaden the impact of the project. I think it is crucial to develop strategies to address the unique challenges and opportunities presented by different nations worldwide. So expanding globally, our project's framework maybe can aid Chinese businesses aligning with their sustainability goals. Success in one region can inspire others, making ripple effects and contribute to global net zero targets. Thank you all for your attention and for the shared commitment to this vital cause. I am keen to discuss these topics further and welcome any questions or thoughts you might have. Thank you so much. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Jack. Again, just some fantastic points. We keep having these themes come out about different levels, right? So top down, bottom up, local government, global governments. And I think this is a great opportunity for our next set of speakers who've been keenly listening to these recommendations to share their thoughts and insights as well. So shall we start with Paula Widdowson? Oh, have we got Paula?
No, is that okay? You should be able to hear me and see me. Is that right?
That's it. Yeah, Paula, we can see and hear you. So what are your thoughts on some of these youth recommendations for climate action?
There's a couple of things just in the broadest possible terms. I would like to inject a note of optimism. I actually think this is doable. I disagree and strongly disagree with the doommongers. Because if we give up now, yes, we will give up. And if we say it's too difficult and everybody else should be doing the work for us and we have to sit and worry in a corner, that is exactly what will happen. So I disagree quite strongly with some of the comments that were mentioned at the start of this presentation. And the reason I disagree is if you have a look at the arms race, and I use that term advisedly, that is going on in America and China and Finland, for who can be the first and the best leaders in terms of renewable technology and solving the crisis that we are currently involved with in terms of climate. You can see the billions and billions of pounds that are being spent there and the vast resources of expertise and intelligence that is being put forward. Finland, within 6 years, will be net zero, and they use 3 times the amount of energy per person in their country than the UK does. This is doable. Okay, so that's where I start from. Now, looking at the tool and looking at what is being said, absolutely agree we need to be collaborative. Absolutely agree that we need to all stop repeating and doing the same thing over and over, whether it's across different council areas or whether it's as one administration goes in and follows another one and says, do you know what, that wasn't good enough or whatever. I would strongly recommend everybody looks at the Carbon Disclosure Project. This is where I big up York, where I'm was the executive member for environment. We are one of 7 cities in the UK that has got the A listing from the Carbon Disclosure Project, and the listing doesn't get any higher than that, one of 119 globally. So we do actually have a format to make sure that we know what we're doing will work. How that then plays into the local government authority, association even, where I'm a board member for environment, transport and housing, is that we try and take those learnings together and actually pick a series of actions or activities that we can make a real difference on. If you look at the list, whether it's from working collaboratively to spaces for new people, to accessible transport. You look at the list and the structure that One Planet has put together to systemize it, it sometimes feels like you're trying to boil the ocean with a candle. So therefore, what we're trying to do with the LGA is what will make the biggest difference, and how do we influence government, as in Westminster, to do the things they need to do, which are big infrastructures and big policy changes, whilst we make sure that the stuff on the ground that we can all do happens. So it's not one or the other. We're twin tracking all of these activities. And if you pick a couple, and I know Jack mentioned one, which was retrofit. Retrofit has a major impact on fuel poverty, on health, on cost of living crisis, on security, on all aspects of people's lives for vulnerable people, the same as putting in green spaces. So again, I'll blow the trumpet for York. We've won several awards nationally for the largest community woodlands that we have created. The reason that we've done that is, yes, it's a carbon sink, but actually the leisure, health and mental well-being and biodiversity improvements are huge. So it's how you get those ripple benefits rather than chasing each one individually is how I would summarize it. I hope that helps, and I think that's about 5 minutes.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you so much, Paula. So yeah, this idea of ripple effects, you know, actually by doing one thing, a domino effect of massive positive change can be seen not only in one region, but actually across the country. Joe, it'd be great to hear your thoughts on the recommendations as well.
Hello, my name is Joe Baker. I'm a local authority officer who's been working in the sustainability and carbon field for about 20 years now, working in several local authorities in London. I currently work for Haringey Council, which has set an ambitious target, an optimistic, shall we say, target of being net zero by 2041. Unfortunately, to be slightly pessimistic, we're behind the curve at the moment. We're not delivering at the rate we need to achieve the net zero ambition for it. I think what we're seeing here in this talk, and I think Poran highlighted it very eloquently at the beginning, is the interconnectivity between so many systems that have to be addressed. And sometimes that interconnectivity can make it complex and overwhelming, and therefore inertia happens because we're fighting so many battles on so many fronts. So I think a systems approach and mapping of it is what we can do. So those co-challenges that we see, actually, if we map them out simply, could probably deliver more co-benefits for the people. In Haringey, we know that actually, as an authority, the majority of our carbon footprint is nothing to do with the council. In rough estimates, we think it's about 8% we directly control, our schools, our corporate buildings, our fleet and our social housing stock, but 92% of our borough's carbon emissions come from the community, the businesses, the residents, the transport choices that make. And therefore we need to focus on empowering and enabling and co-delivering the solutions to those challenges that we see. And I think this kind of systems approach and networking will help deliver it. It will, as I think has been alluded to in the talks earlier, signpost people to answers to some of the challenges that they're facing. It will be supportive of positive action that we can deliver together and learn from other organisations that have been through the same learning curve that we're fighting and maybe even getting depressed about as we fight myths around the war on motorists, etc., that we see in the media. And I think it's also about a communications tool that we can signpost and get people to listen to the messages in different ways, in different tones, so that they can hear and understand what their role can be. And I think it needs to be accessible for all people. So I fully agree. And actually, I think a very deliverable part of the recommendations from this report is about the youth. It is very difficult for a politician probably to step away from hearing the young voices in the room. And yet it's a very good photo opportunity to be seen, to be listening to the young voices in the room. So I think that's a good one that potentially at a local or national government level, we really could make some great traction with. So therefore, I think that would be the recommendation that I am most interested with as a civil servant type role that I've got. And I think it's inevitable that we will use systems approach. Even if we don't use it to try and stop the carbon emissions, we will inevitably use it as we go into crisis mode to become climate resilient. and inevitably society will use the systems approach, as we've seen during COVID. And actually these networks will form organically to try and help build resilience among our community. But I will leave you with a quote which kind of sits on the fence like a good civil servant should, about pessimism and optimism. And it's a quote from Carl Rogers. And basically he says that when I look at the world, I feel pessimistic. But when I look at the people, I am optimistic. And I think that's where we stand.
Wow, Joe, thank you so much. Again, we're not holding back on today's call. It's absolutely fantastic. So let's move on to a central government perspective with our next speaker now, Lord Ian McNichol. I think Rupert's on the call. He's going to share some thoughts as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I love Paula's optimism and enthusiasm and share it. And actually, Joe, your final quote goes to that. It's about what we can do. So I've got a few words which sort of pulled together. So let me read them, and then I'll just give you some wider thoughts. So my name's Ian McNichol. I came into the House of Lords in 2018. Before that, I was the General Secretary of the Labour Party, and I've spent the last 30 years of my life in and around the trade union movement and the Labour Party and Labour movement. And, you know, I've seen firsthand the difficulties of ensuring that public and private and community organisations can work together to solve the biggest challenges of our time. And events like this are so important. The need to reduce duplication, bring together diverse expertise and experiences, and as the young people have recommended, find new means of enhanced collaboration across the political divide has never been greater. And it is that political. So my big concern is that the whole issue of the environment is being used as a wedge issue in the politics just now. And what we need to do is to do all we can to take the environment, carbon, the future, saving the planet out of individual political party doctrines and make it wider and bigger. And that's the real challenge that we face. And it's one of the reasons that I've got involved with Rewired Earth, and one of the reasons that we've engaged and brought Purin and others onto the advisory board. So Rewired Earth, or if you want to have a look on your computers, rewired.earth will take you to the questionnaire. It's a cross-market coalition, and we're committed to enabling the world to share that collective voice. So we haven't heard a lot about the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. They underpin, the 16, 17 SDGs underpin the work that we do in Rewired Earth. And it's about reaching out, and you can do this at a local level, at school level, at a council level, community level, to seek and to try and understand what individuals within that community care about the most across the SDGs. We can then share, and this is the most important part, share that information with you and with the organisations that we look to partner with, so that you, in the decision making that you then take, can use that information to make the best decisions for the communities that you look to represent or work within. And that's one of the reasons I'm so excited by the work of those young people supporting One Planet in these new partnerships. If we've only got five minutes, I'd quite like to bring in Rue as well, because Rue's the chief exec of Rewired Earth, if that's okay, Masa. But just to say, there is an opportunity to drive political change and to drive political consensus on this. We saw some of that being stepped back by the government, especially around the motor industry, but pressure can be brought to bear on politicians of all political persuasions to do the right thing and to make the right decisions. And the Rewired Earth tool will hopefully be part of that. The other reason why Paul is so right is that there are hundreds of little startups and pop-ups and organizations that are looking to make a difference. And you know, you talked about Haringey, you talked about Hackney, you talked about York. There are great local initiatives. How do we take them here in Westminster and then amplify them and get them out there? LGA is a great way of doing that, the Local Government Association, but there are lots of other ways. Sorry, I'm a politician, I could just keep on talking, but I will stop there and let Rue come in, if that's okay. But thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, Rupert, did you want to say a couple of words as well on that?
Yeah, I'll keep it very brief because I know we're short on time. But I just wanted to say that I think the work the young leaders are doing and the work that Poran and the team have been delivering over the last few months is absolutely fantastic. And it really does go to the heart of what I think we're all trying to do with the coalition is actually how do we not just enable young people to share their voice, but actually how does that deliver action? Because it's all very well, we can talk about it all we want, but then how does these voices, as we're doing today, reach the decision makers? How do we actually, and grateful to Ian, will be speaking and we'll be holding an event in the Houses of Parliament in January, end of January, early February, with the young leaders and with One Planet, so we can actually share these recommendations and share these results. Because if we don't actually translate those into policy, into decision making, and actually drive change across society, then we're failing in terms of the work we're trying to do in our jobs. So I do think One Planet is a unique tool for joining the dots around policy making, around strategy, and we've already seen some of these recommendations. But actually, how do we accelerate that now? How do we work across every city in the UK, but also internationally, to think about where are the shared outcomes? Where are those actions and activities and indicators that really can drive change in a joined up way? And I think it goes to all of the work that Poran is doing around joined up government, interconnected government. But my commitment to all of the young leaders on the call is please get in touch with myself or Poran, and let's figure out a way that we can ensure that some of the global businesses that we work with and support Rewired Earth, but also the politicians and the political parties that support Rewired Earth, let's sit down and let's make sure that these recommendations actually do get listened to and can actually drive the change we need, because it's so critical. And I'm really grateful to Poran for asking us to come on today, but also the opportunities that One Planet present for thinking about a more joined up way of governing.
Thank you, Rupert. And I think that's a perfect segue to have a global perspective from Dr. Jack O'Connor on the call. Jack, if you want to introduce yourself and your insights on the recommendations as well.
Thanks, Masha. Yeah, first of all, it's great to be here this afternoon. This is a really exciting conversation with a bunch of exciting people to be part of. So my name is Jack. I work at United Nations University. We're the research arm of the United Nations, and I work in Germany at an Institute for Environment and Human Security. And here we're focused on things like disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation, and we produce a flagship report, I'll put a link later, on interconnected risks. And the message of this is that a lot of the risks that we see, disasters around the world, all stem from similar societal systemic issues. And we do a lot of analysis to try to identify these and communicate them in an easy way. And I can tell you it's a real challenge. And but one of the reasons why interconnectivity, we're all talking about how important it is, but it gets overlooked, is because it's difficult to see and it's difficult to understand. And so that's why I think things like the One Planet tool and the initiative that's being presented here today is quite inspiring and interesting, because it's a tangible way forward to bring interconnectivity into the consciousness, bring it to decision makers and show them how things are connected in a way that they can understand. And interestingly, we do our analyses and research here at the global level. We looked at different countries in the world. We look at all different kinds of risks and disasters. But the problems that we identify are similar to the problems that are being identified at the local level here in this analysis. And so the solutions that we come back to are similar to the ones being presented here. So that we need to tackle the lack of cooperation, that inequality sits at the root of a lot of our risk. So I just wanted to say to the young researchers here that you're on the right track as far as the global perspective is concerned. And just because you're focusing at the local level, this is something that I think has the potential to be a lighthouse, if you will, for other areas around the world to look at and see that we're sharing the same problems. So don't stop once you go to the Houses of Parliament, and there's more interconnectivity to do. I would also say I'm pretty proud of the young leaders, as we like to call them, because I think there are aspects in their manifesto that come out with new ideas, or they say it in a certain way that maybe the elder leaders aren't so comfortable with. They talk about how cities are still being designed as if cars are inevitable. I think that's true. I think that's not being said so much. We talk about transformation, but I think that the young leaders really have a way of putting it plainly and clearly. But they also are thinking in a more proactive way. So planning for things that maybe haven't happened yet, but are on the horizon. So something else in the manifesto talks about planning for a future climate migration. I think most of the rhetoric that we hear in policymaking at the moment is a partisan argument over migration. Is it good? Is it bad? How do we stop it? How do we get votes? Rather than planning for it as something that we could expect to happen and being prepared for it. So yeah, I'm very impressed with the manifesto and the work that's done here. A couple of recommendations I might give in the implementation of this kind of thing is that there's a lot of great recommendations here. I'd encourage everyone to read it. And when we talk about implementation, the question will come, who's going to do this? Who is responsible, etc. And if we want to tackle things like working collaboratively and tackle specific problems like developing infrastructure, perhaps we could look at developing new authorities that are focused on these kind of issues, like they did in Wales with the future commissioner. So there are a few ways that you could maybe suggest take these recommendations further. But apart from that, I think great job and well done. I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Jack. I know we're all probably itching to go to the Q&A, but we do actually have one more set of insights from MP Caroline Lucas, who couldn't join us today, but the team will be sharing a video she's recorded for us following review of the fantastic recommendations from the young leaders. So let's watch it together now.
Thank you so much for inviting me to reflect on your manifesto. And I am so sorry that I might not be able to join you for this event. Timings of things in Parliament are impossible to know in advance, and it could be that the debate on the Rwanda bill starts at exactly the time I was hoping to speak with you. So I have recorded this just in case, and please do accept my apologies if I can't be with you. But as I speak, COP28 in Dubai is entering its final hours with negotiators thrashing out the final text. And as you know, this COP has been historic for many reasons. It opened with the operationalization of the Loss and Damage Fund, a vital tool for climate justice that those on the front line of the climate crisis have demanded for decades. And whilst rich countries did come forward with pledges to this new fund to address the harm that they have themselves caused, the amount of money remains vastly insufficient. And in the case of the UK, the money isn't new at all, but it's actually being siphoned off from an existing and already depleted financial pot. And I think I'd want to say that you simply cannot tackle the climate crisis by effectively robbing Peter to pay Paul. Yet this COP might just go down in history for being the fossil fuel COP, and maybe not only for bad reasons. You'll know that it's being presided over by the CEO of an oil company. You'll know that there have been almost 2,500 fossil fuel lobbyists in attendance. Those are all the bad reasons it might go down as the fossil fuel COP. But it might also finally be the COP that deals with the root cause of the climate crisis, which is fossil fuels. So at this COP, we absolutely must see an agreement to phase out all fossil fuels. No ifs, no buts, no caveats. Rising to the climate crisis demands that we leave fossil fuels in the ground. It demands that we transform our economies, and it demands that we deliver on climate justice. And that's why I wholeheartedly welcome your manifesto for what local governments should be aiming to achieve. I absolutely agree that climate action should simultaneously address issues around health, nature, and equity, and that these co-benefits have to be communicated clearly. Because tackling the climate crisis isn't just about cutting emissions. It's an opportunity to create a greener, fairer society where nature is restored, where we can all breathe clean air, and where everyone has access to warm homes, healthy food, and good green jobs. And I particularly like the focus in your manifesto on the importance of training. I also appreciate your focus on equity and the fact that equity should be embedded in all policy and strategy to address intersectional risk factors so that we build resilience across society as a whole, not just in segments of society. I think you're absolutely right about that. And of course, it's absolutely necessary that these plans are realistic and measurable, because as we all know from the government's track record, we cannot cut emissions with targets alone. We need the policies to deliver them. You know, there is so much richness in your manifesto, and I'm really sorry I don't have time to do it justice, but I did just want to end by saying how particularly heartened I am to see your recommendation that local governments should learn from the Wales Wellbeing of Future Generations Act. As you might know, I previously tabled a similar Wellbeing of Future Generations bill in Westminster because I wanted it to cover the UK as a whole, and I firmly believe that decision-making in government would be vastly improved if there were a duty to prioritise the well-being of children and young people. Because the planet needs restoring, not just for today, but for tomorrow and the day after. You know this, and it's time that our politicians did too.
Thank you to Caroline Lucas for her thoughts there as well. So
thank you so much for inviting me to reflect on your
starts again from the beginning. We will pop up another poll for all of you, another question to share. Yeah, I think that it's just been such a wealth of information, and I just want to take this opportunity to really thank all the speakers for their insights, particularly those who are working on this on the ground and have so much experience to share in terms of success stories as well as barriers. So the question is really who should be leading, and I think we've heard a lot of different ideas around this throughout the session, but lead in the sense of really setting the tone, practicing what they preach, and holding others accountable to delivering that as well. And while we are answering the question, please again do feel free to pop a question if you have one in the chat, or raise a hand. Always nice and easy if you want to pop yourself off mute to ask our speakers before we move on to a much bigger discussion at the end of the session. So has anybody got a burning question they wanted to ask some of our speakers across local, central government, global perspectives? Okay, I have a question that's actually come in the chat now, so I'll put this to all the speakers on the table. So around this idea of action, so the question is, who needs to be responsible for making sure the action takes place? So I think they're referring to sort of long-term as well, accountability. Shall I put that to Joe? Do you want to start us off with that one?
So who will be accountable? So I think it is ultimately the citizens, and the citizens therefore vote in the electorate. But I think there needs to be the ruling classes are the politicians. But I think politicians need to be telling the truth in a lot of these things, and that's going to be the hard part of it. We can't, if I see another politician say, but we've done lots of carbon reduction in the past, therefore Britain's done its fair share, and that's its leadership role. I think that's a challenge, because it's now we're talking about, it's action here, and I think therefore that we need to have an honest, transparent scoring probably of statements made, or untruths may be told, or accidents may happen, and that's published for the community to understand and vote accordingly, because it might be that actually as a society we're quite happy living in a carbon-rich world and heading towards oblivion. And that might be a fair outcome if that's what, as a species, we vote for. But I just think we need to understand what we're getting involved in, and maybe that will help.
Thank you, Joe. And we've had a sort of follow-on question really around metrics and indicators. How do we evaluate this progress? So like you were saying, you know, around this accountability. So Jack, I don't know if you have any insights. You were talking about sort of systems logging, but how we can really track this in a standardized way at global and local scales.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes to these questions about accountability, at the United Nations, we have to be a little bit careful. We're supposed to be an impartial body, but I think that there's always a tendency to focus on the politicians, especially at COP, and I feel like in a way that disempowers us a little. It's if Mr. Sunak or if somebody doesn't make the right decision, there's nothing we can do, and we're all sort of screwed. And that disempowers us, as Melissa says, we should all have the case. So I hesitate to put all the accountability in the lap of the politicians when we realize that they're people too, and the values that we hold as a society are supported by each and every one of us. And in terms of metrics, there are, if you want to hold governments accountable, there are different frameworks for holding governments accountable. And I think one of the key things to do is to push transparency. So it will be a lot harder to get away with some of the, you may say more nefarious practices if there's a lot more regulation on transparency and people have to demonstrate and show the financial flows behind their different decisions. So that would be one step I would take.
Thank you, Jack. And Donna, I can see your hand is raised, but we will have an opportunity to have a lot more discussion. We're on the cusp of that final discussion session. But just before we get there, Puran, I'm going to put that really difficult question to you now. Ben, if you'll share what people have been thinking around leadership so we can review that while I ask you. Puran, what do we do? We've had some really great insight at all different levels from experts who've been in the industry for decades. And some themes have come out around transparency, you know, real leadership required actually from everyone, which is reflected in the poll today. But for people on this call who feel inspired, ready to go for a much more sustainable 2024 based in action, what would you say are the next steps?
Yeah, thanks, Massa, for that, and thanks to all the speakers for their contributions. And yeah, I was very pleased that the poll came out that everyone should be leading, because I think it is that we you know, we are citizens, we are individuals, we also have our jobs, we work in communities, and for each of those hats we wear, if you like, we can be pushing towards creating a more regenerative future. So I love that. Thank you, everyone, for agreeing that we should all lead. But in terms of next steps, actually, can I have the next slide, please, Ben? I think there's a next one on. Yeah, so what can we do? Look, thanks to the local, to our young leaders for doing that systems mapping. Absolutely fantastic, and we'll be working with more universities in future as well to get that our systems mapping tool out into the hands of young people to use in their studies and hopefully in their communities as well. But we do have these systems maps now for about 50 or so local governments. So if you are one of those, do contact us and you can take over that systems map and keep it up to date. So that'll be fantastic. Otherwise, contact us. We can look at helping you create those plans, train you up. So there are opportunities there. As Lord McNichol and Rupert said, we're organising a joint event with Rewired Earth at the House of Commons late January, early February for young leaders to meet the MPs and talk to them about the manifesto, their recommendations and what can be done. So that's going to be fantastic. Our big idea for 2024, working with partners, with some parliamentarians and civil servants, we're pushing forward the idea of for an office for joined up government. So if we can join, so we're starting to join the dots, of course, at the local level, and we're not just doing that, community groups are doing that, of course councils are doing that, people are doing that. We're hopefully providing a tool which can accelerate that. So just as we're joining the dots at the local level, can we start joining the dots at central government level? My background is actually in neuroscience and medical sciences, but up to 80% of NHS spending could be avoided if people had healthy diets, healthy lifestyles, and a clean environment. So, and those figures are going to get worse, potentially worse, as as people get hit with the impacts of climate change. So there are huge budget savings to be made by creating a more sustainable future. And really that, I think, has to be led at the central government level. So we're very excited by that, getting a lot of traction for that. Do contact me if you want to get involved in that. We'll have more workshops for local government and young leaders to continue the systems mapping. So contact us for that. Sign up for our newsletter, follow us on social media to be kept in touch. And don't hesitate to contact us about absolutely anything. We love talking to people, and it's through that discussion, through the building of those relationships, that we can really join the dots, make the connections. And in making those connections, I think we really can start regenerating the planet on which we all depend. So I was one of the people who were very optimistic about what we can do following COP. Now, that might not be because the COP is very successful, but because people may realize, oh, we got to do things ourselves. And so, maybe ask not what the planet can do for you, but what you can do for the planet. And let's all work together and really get this cracked.
Thank you, Paran. Some really powerful final words. Am I right in thinking Lord Ian McNichol had some further thoughts that he wanted to add just before he ran off? I think we may have just missed.
Just very, very, very briefly, I think Puran covered many of them. It was just about the accountability side of it, and I suppose there's three ways of driving real change. There's people power, there's government, and then there's finance, and basically making the financial systems work for us rather than working away. And I think if we, through the manifesto that you've produced, through the different political parties, different organisations, can work on all three of them, there is a lot of people power out there just now, people taking their own actions, and that's critical. But then the next stage that follows on from that is forcing government to do the right thing. But then the third strand, which we sometimes forget, is basically forcing, encouraging, helping financial institutions, businesses and companies to do the right thing as well, and rewarding good. So when businesses do the right thing, we reward them, and that's another strand of Rewired Earth as well. So thank you.
Thank you so much. And yeah, so I think a really strong wrap up there. Actually, this session seems to have gone quite quickly. But what I would add to all of that actually is just the importance of highlighting the good work that is happening. Like Paran mentioned, at all levels, kind of community level as well, there are people, different councils that have some fantastic case studies to share. So what a brilliant tool to really have an opportunity to review all of that. So thank you so much to the One Planet team for taking on this project. You've done a fantastic job, and particularly the young leaders as well, who have shown such commitment and again, real optimism for what might be possible. And again, of course, to our speakers, for any of you that can stay on for our open discussion, we'd love to have you. I'm sure there will be lots of questions coming your way, but if you can't make it, we hope to speak to you again soon. So virtual round of applause, I'm sure, for everybody involved. And we've got about half an hour now to get stuck into a Q&A discussion. So as always, I do welcome you to raise your hand if you do want to bring yourself off of mute to discuss any ideas, actually, not even necessarily questions that you wanted to bring forward. So is there anybody who wanted to get us started? I think Paula, actually, if you're on the line there, I think you had some thoughts you wanted to share. Is that right? Oh, have we still got Paula on the call? While we're waiting for that, I'll pass over to Donna maybe to start off. I know you've been patiently waiting with your hand raised.
My question is really about the speed of getting things done. So obviously that's an issue with involving everybody. But also we need long-termers. So the problem with politicians, and I've been one before, is that's local and national, how we get them not to change their mind every 37 days. So that's what I'm just putting out there. How we get how we get decisions made that are longer term. And I know that that's the advantage of having a confidence of joint thinking.
That's a really good question, actually, Donna. So I think I just caught you there asking the question about, change in decision makers and how that influences, even if you do have everything mapped out and policies set, how you can ensure that's delivered consistently over longer periods of time than maybe 3-5 years. Do we have any of our speakers on the call, maybe actually drawing from experience, that could add to that or provide some thoughts? Neve, I don't know if your hand is raised because you had...
Mine's raised because I've got a question.
Okay,
So
we'll come
I'll
to
wait
you next. That's fine. Melissa, I think you raised your hand. Any insights there?
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if I've heard the question right, so I might answer the wrong question. But I was just going to actually give an analogy from National Highways. And National Highways have created a digital twin of their organisation. And the digital twin, and it's very similar. So it's mapping, in some ways it probably looks quite similar, what you've been saying, it's mapping. And you can come at it from different angles. You can go through people, you can go through information, you can sort of go around it in different ways, and it layers their information. And what they've found is that because it reflects the way the organisation is, as opposed to the way maybe it should be, reflects the way it is that the information flow is different to the people organisational chart, if I can put it that way. So in other words, you find out there's a department over here with these people, and then you want some information, you're expecting it to say be over here in this department, and it's in this department, and you're like, oh, why is that person doing that? And why aren't they with this person here? And what they're looking at is basically information flow through their organisation, and then saying, well, should we restructure our entire organisation around information flows? And I'm just using that as an example, and to say, I hope I am answering the question, because I think that the mapping that you're doing at a larger scale, so larger than organisational, it could have that effect at the organisational level. So each local authority might start to say, well, hold on a minute, actually, health is more connected to this than we thought, so maybe it shouldn't be but also generally across the whole of the country, it's like the flow, once you start to understand the interconnectedness and the flow of information, I think it's a massive unlocker. And that's another thing about talking about we have to wait for politicians and things like that. So this is what gives you the power, is when you suddenly start understanding how change is made and how it comes about. You start to realize you don't necessarily have to wait for X, Y, and Z. It's more about understanding these flows and removing blockers and rearranging things. So I hope that did answer the question. I might have answered a different one.
You're getting the thumbs up, Melissa. So I think you did. And that's really interesting, actually. I think a lot of the conversation today has been around reshaping our perspectives on how these things are supposed to work and almost reimagining a way these systems can flow. Neve, did you want to ask your question to the group?
Yes. So kind of, I think we're all very frustrated about feeling that there is, there's some conversations which say there's a lot of action that's going on around climate, but we really know that there's not enough, especially from Mike's graph that he showed us at the start. But also what was really interesting about that graph, and it brings me to the point or the question that I'm going to ask, is one of the areas that we saw there actually be a dip in carbon emissions was during COVID. And also during COVID, we saw that actually governments across the globe were able to put through actions, policies very, very quickly. They were able to come up with solutions very, very quickly to, stop the spread of coronavirus. Obviously, there were problems that came with that along the way, but, we got through it and action was taken very, very quickly. And we also did see our emissions drop as well during that time. And I guess my question is, how do we communicate how can that same approach really be taken with climate so that climate action is actually, because it's not an excuse of we can't get it done, because you take something as crazy and unprecedented as COVID, we got through it. So why can't the same be done with climate, and why isn't that same approach happening with climate action is my question.
Thank you, Neve. Really valid points there, particularly around this idea of climate emergency versus climate change. And we are seeing that sort of vocabulary starting to change, but again, not matching what we've seen in terms of what we'd expect from an emergency response. Jack, I have to come to you on this one, again, just to think a little bit about risk analysis and just generally some of the points Neve raised about COVID response. I don't know if you have any thoughts there to share.
Yeah, I do. No, thank you. Thanks for the question as well. I guess it's something that a lot of us were thinking. We saw a coordinated global action, a drastic action that changed people's behavior a little bit by force to deal with a drastic problem. And I think there are a couple of aspects to it. One of them is perhaps the people that lost out of those actions were maybe not as powerful as the people that stand to lose out by taking drastic climate action. That's one thing. But I think there's also a perception of climate change still being something in the future. It's something that's not happening now, and we don't want to change until we see it on our doorstep. And even now we are starting to see it, and we're still not changing. Somebody gave a example before about Finland and the US and China leading sustainability actions. But China, for example, is also building a record number of fossil fuel industries or coal plants. And there's this idea that we still want to have the cake and eat it too. So there's a transformation happening of a positive nature that is trying to manifest while we're still trying to hold on to the old system. And as long as we try to have both, the action is going to stall. So we need that sort of decisive, we're going to sacrifice what we have in order to transform, like what was done in a very short time for the COVID pandemic.
Yeah, really clear response there, Jack. Thank you. Did any of our other panelists want to add a point to that before we move on to the next question? Oh, Puran, is that your hand raised to add something further?
Yeah, I think it is, Massa. Taking on Jack's point about where climate change is actually with us now, it's unfolding. For me, creating resilient communities, regardless, is going to put us in the best position. So, in fact, it might be that as climate change unfolds, it becomes the driver for us coming together as communities. And I think, if those communities can come together in a way which creates resilience, more local food, more local energy, more local connection, more sense of belonging, but does it in a way which also regenerates the living systems on which we depend, then I think we can almost roll with it. I love an Aikido type of analogy where you use your opponent's force to just move them along and get use their force to get something new going. So that's why I'm very optimistic as well, in that I think we can change ourselves from a consumer species to a regenerator species, and perhaps that's just this hard transformation that we're going through. I don't know if that's helpful or not, but I'd love to see masses of nature-based solutions to really give us, get us on a different track.
Thank you, Puran. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really useful point because, we've seen this consistently drawn out of the speakers today, this idea of co-benefits. So communicating, obviously climate resilience is obviously important, but actually more immediate concerns that people do consider present issues like health issues, fuel poverty, cost of living. So to Jack's point about this sort of temporal piece, actually, if you can show climate action as a solution to problems people are facing day to day, maybe that might be part of the cultural shift we need to see. We do have another hand raised. I'm so sorry we don't have your name on the screen. I've got Zoom user, so maybe you could tell us your name and your question as well.
Hello, my name is Minhan. I'm sorry my name isn't showing up on the Zoom. I'm not sure what happened. So can I ask a question about the One Planet platform? I understand on the platform there are indicators to keep track the outcome, the progress. So can I know more detail about what kind of indicators are we looking at and what method are used to collect all those data scientifically?
Brilliant question. I'll pass that on to the One Planet team. I don't know if Niamh or Tash, you wanted to input here.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. So with this, with the platform, it's very much the indicators, because the platform is open for any organization, business, local government, council also to use. The indicators tend to be set up by the kind of individual or the organization who is using the indicators themselves. So we don't actually choose which indicators people choose to measure, and it's up to them to kind of record and collect that data as they wish. The system is more there as a kind of reporting tool for them to kind of populate those indicators with their data so that they can kind of communicate it better, whether that's in a report, whether that's in our mind map. But what we have done with the kind of Young Leaders Manifesto is that we have sort of identified any sort of indicators that we've noticed sort of multiple different local councils are kind of using to measure certain progress around given outcomes or actions, and kind of put those forward as recommendations of indicators they could use to measure their outcomes or actions. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Yeah.
Thank you, Niamh. Puran, again, I don't know if you wanted to add to that around indicators.
Yeah, I'm just, I'll add that, to what Niamh was saying, which is, yeah, we do allow our users and groups of users, because of course they collaborate in ecosystems to choose their own indicators, but we are also partnering now with other organizations, which are much more based around sector-specific indicators, to include those indicators in our system so that they can be tracked. So, for example, with Rewired Earth, for example, they're going to be tracking indicators, but our system will enable them to join the dots around those indicators. So, so our role is to join the dots, but we want to partner, and we are partnering with organizations who are looking at different sectors and what indicators those different sectors might want to track.
Yeah, I mean, it's again really inspiring from a case study perspective. So whether you're a business, local authority, whoever, and you're looking to map your own strategy, actually using the One Planet tool as inspiration to sort of go in and see what other indicators are different groups similar to yourself using. And hopefully that could actually be quite a big motivator behind more standardized metrics. So thank you for clarifying that, Puran. Joe, did you have an additional point regarding indicators?
Yeah, I do think it would be helpful if there was a kind of a best practice template for indicators, because as local authorities, we used to have national frameworks of indicators we had to report on, and that was all mapped out. But we've lost all of that now, and so local authorities choose their own matrix for what they need to do. And that doesn't really help if you're comparing authority A with authority B. And therefore, I do think we need that. And also, we game indicators as well. So at the moment, most authorities who have been doing their borough footprints for a number of years, Haringey being one of them, can tell a journey about carbon reduction. But fundamentally, most of that carbon reduction hasn't been delivered by the local authority. It's been delivered by national grid decarbonisation. And this year we're seeing national grid power carbonisation go the wrong way. So actually, most authorities will be showing an increase in their carbon emissions this year at a national level.
Thank you, Joe. We will move on to Mike Dixon's question. Mike, if you want to put yourself off mute.
Yeah, just a question. How did the head of an oil company become the president of COP28? I'm just interested to know how he achieved it.
Okay, fair question, Mike. I think there was some chat around this earlier. I don't know if anybody specifically as part of the panelist groups want to respond to that. Melissa?
Yeah, I was going to say, I can say if no one else can. So it's up to the country to put forward the person, but then it is up to the others to accept. But in this instance, the country appoints who the person is once they've won the bid to host it. But Puran, if you were going to say something more eloquent, please do.
I don't know about more eloquent, Melissa, but yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting question, and it's interesting how, as you rightly asked, Mike, the CEO of a oil company gets to chair COP. The UAE is very interesting. We have done some work there, and I think particularly Abu Dhabi is quite different from the rest of the Emirates in the UAE. So, for example, we worked with them to create a sustainability strategy for Masdar City, which is run completely on renewable energy. So they are also, and by the way, I'm not trying to defend all this, but I'm just saying how one of the ways it may have got through is that he's also CEO of Masdar, which is a very large renewable energy company as well, and Masdar City, which is a quarter of Abu Dhabi, a quarter as in a city quarter of Abu Dhabi, which is run on renewable energy. So I think it's a difficult, complex world we live in, and far too many contradictions in that Mike. And God knows how we work through all those contradictions, but let's see what's the outcome of COP.
Thank you, Puran. I think it's a good point as well to pass on to Holly. I know this was something you mentioned, actually a big part of your frustrations, actually. So any thoughts on that, or an additional question you might have as well?
Yeah, mine was actually an additional question. So I don't know if you wanted to pass on to anyone else that wanted to comment more on that before I moved on, or am I okay to go ahead with the next question?
Any other burning thoughts on the COP policies?
Yeah, I mean, I was kind of adding on to what Niamh was saying earlier about how we can get, you know, more urgency in the action and the kind of policies put through more. And I guess it's a comment on that, but also a question within itself, because it's something I definitely don't have the answer for. And I share her frustration. And often my frustration lies with policy making in general around the language. I think so much of it comes from lack of clear communication. And for those of us that aren't politicians and those of us that aren't climate science experts, there seems to be just so much jargon, like especially over the last few days where that draft has been released, and there's so much debate going on about exactly which words are used and which terms mean what. It takes so much time and mental capacity to go away and really do research on when people are making these policies and making these promises, what it is that they're actually promising. Because often if you're not someone that's, you know, clued up on all the lingo and terminology, you might think it's something very different to what it actually is, because there might be a one word in there that creates a loophole that you didn't realize, but that loophole is something that's then used to delay more action. So I think, yeah, I guess it's kind of a question within itself, because it all just seems really arduous to me. I don't know if anyone else shares that sentiment, that there just seems to be so much, and I don't know if it's done intentionally to keep people distracted and to keep people confused, so that when the promises aren't kept, they didn't realize they weren't kept. Does that make sense? But yeah, I think, you know, with what Niamh was saying, as we were going through the pandemic, the rules were very clear. You know, it was all in layman's terms, and, you know, there wasn't so much, well, no, there was, but I mean, generally, you know, we kind of knew what was happening as we were going along. But I find with COP and doing the One Planet program, when we were looking at the different local council, local borough climate action plans, they all had completely different terminology. And I remember speaking to Tash and Niamh a few times to say, you know, I can't actually decipher what's an outcome, what's an indicator, what's an action, because all the terminology on every single one is so different. So I think, yeah, clear communication is such an essential part of getting action across quicker. But how do we get over that gap? How do we make it clearer for people that might not understand all the terminology?
Thank you, Holly, and I'm really glad you raised that, because it was clear it was, again, a really key recommendation that came out of the young leaders. And Melissa, I know you've got your hand raised. So how do we solve this communication piece and standardize the vocabulary and make it more accessible in a way that will actually help drive change across all the different groups that a lot of these bodies say they want to include, with quite exclusionary language?
Well, I feel I've had my hand up a lot, so if anyone else wants to say something, I'm going to go from a particularly a data and digital point of view, because I'm involved in a lot of digital initiatives as well. And really, what this all comes down to is what we were talking about before about the information flow, which is why the systems mapping is so important. And I'm particularly involved with digital twins as well. And what we're trying to do is be able to get digital twins to talk to each other. And what we've discovered that sits underneath all of this is what we call data sharing infrastructure, which will be as important as our physical infrastructure. So we've got physical, if you need to get gas and electricity and telecoms, we have physical infrastructure. What we need is data sharing infrastructure. So it's not that you have access to all data at all times, it's just you have access to the data that you need across silos, across sectors, across organizations. So there's a lot of work going into that, and sitting underneath that is exactly what you're talking about. So I'm not going to answer the question, but just to let you know that it's like, it is almost the question, and it's a thing that lots of people are grappling with at a global, national, organization, sector level, but even within organizations. So I'm at the infrastructure client group, and I run a program. I have a sustainability group, I have a data and digital group, and I've got the chief data officers, I've got the chief sustainability officers, and they speak a different language. So sometimes they're saying the same thing, but they use different words to say it. So I kind of bring them together and try to help them. We also do a lot of translating for CEOs and boards. So the digital people, they have a lot of the solutions to a lot of the issues that we're talking about. There can be a lot of, especially I've talked about connected digital twins, but they can't unlock the investment because they can't speak in a language that the board understands to unlock the investment. So I don't know if I'm giving the answer, but I'm just telling you that this is a really communication, and language is a really core part. And another thing I'll just say, just because it's my hobby horse at the moment, and I've put it loads in the chat, is that the thing I do, the creative bit, which comes back to the storytelling and the communications, if you think about things like HS2 being cancelled because the storytelling around it was terrible, and that's, at the end of the day, that's why it's cancelled. It's people haven't understood. And so I think there's this, we need people in the room wherever we're doing these things. We need people who have creative ideas, who can imagine different transport systems, who can imagine, who can have new ideas and have storytelling that helps to inspire people to action.
Thank you, Melissa. I'll pass on to Jack to add some additional points on that one.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, as someone that works within the UN system, yes, it's very confusing language, and it's very difficult to understand, and it seems intentionally vague. And it's this way not just across the Paris Agreement, but it's a UN language all of its own. And it's also done at the end of a text that has been discussed and agreed upon by all the nations, all the member states. So it's very difficult to come up with a clear language when you have 150 different views trying to shape it differently. So I think that comes out of it, and we rely on observers there that watch and interpret to us what it means. So it would be great, but getting a clear text that the layperson could understand out of the COP process is not so likely. But it does also show how important language is. No one knew words were so important, whether you say, phase out or slowly phase out or try to, every single word is wrangled over for days and days. And so when you're taking your recommendations, and especially for working collaboratively, I think you hit a nail on the head there. If you want different people to work together, it's important to agree on language. So that's part of the step. So when you're building people together to work collaboratively, remember to address this so that everybody's on the same page with their terms.
Thank you. Shall we have Jack, different Jack, to input there from a sort of young leader perspective as well?
Hi, I have a question for Melissa. So kind of from a business student perspective, I've been looking at like different forms of visas for UK. This visa like innovator founder visa, and this Tier 1 investor visa. Well, Tier 1 investor visa need the investor to at least deposit £2 million within UK. Well, innovator founder visa only like need the investor to kind of show the evidence that they can hold around 50,000 quid in total. So which is like 2.5% of the amounts those Tier 1 investors have to deposit. So what I'm asking is, as an industry like a transformation professor, how do you think organizations like consulting organizations can help those sustainable kind of companies to achieve the innovator fundraiser? In which way we can mention the kind of highlight the key points of sustainable organizations to get such an offer from various countries? Because I was mentioning before, I think me and my teammates, we believe, so like to achieve net zero, countries must work together, and businesses from the world should also cooperate in some way together. So that's basically my question, to say what key points, key factors that could help like sustainable organization to grasp that innovator fundraiser offer.
Yeah, so I would say, and I don't think I'm a qualified expert to answer on this, by the way, but I would say it's focusing on outcomes, not on outputs, is what we've found is the secret. So, and that sort of actually goes back to the storytelling in some ways as well. It can be slightly uncomfortable for consultants actually, because the business model tends to be bums on seats and hours. So actually moving to a model of outcomes focus and being paid to achieve outcomes can actually be a little bit uncomfortable, but I do think it's the future. And I also think it's why I was saying I think the future is place-based, because the outcomes will be specific to a certain place. But if you can articulate, and this even goes back actually to me saying about the board unlocking the investment for digital, like it's the answer to everything is to focus on outcomes. If you can articulate what the outcomes will be, and as I say, in our vision, it's that at the highest level, it's for enable people and nature to flourish. So the more that you can go through to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, kind of at that level, but you've got project level outcomes, community level outcomes, national outcomes, and global outcomes. And the more that you can articulate and have that golden thread of what it is that you're trying to achieve. And so if I go back when I mentioned HS2, like if you can actually see that and give that vision, that really helps to unlock things. And it also shows the co-benefits, because if you're talking about an outcome, then you can see that it can have lots of different benefits across lots of different areas. Whereas if you're talking about an output, it's probably going to have a much more specific. So that's our learning from the infrastructure client group, is that shift away from scope or outputs, bums on seats, etc., to outcomes, because sort of co-created outcomes with benefits, sort of co-benefits. Please, anyone else jump in if you can on that.
Thank you, Melissa. I'm just conscious we've only got a couple of minutes left, actually, unfortunately, but there's been some great chat and back and forth over text. And there was one question specifically around companies and organizations. I think we've done some focusing on politicians, but actually, again, Joe, I don't know if you want to input here, but how you encourage businesses within a local authority or even at a bigger scale to take part, and what incentives or certifications can really help them do that in a standardized way.
I think it's exactly what Melissa said. It's more about the narrative of it and the opportunities. In reality, we can't promise businesses that they will deliver 1 million more widgets, but we can say that actually we believe that we know we're going to do all these retrofits, and there's an opportunity here for your business to enter the marketplace, and we can train your staff to become more enabled to access that marketplace. A lot of the big companies, though, seem to be nodding to the process and taking part. But I think actually, again, going back to that, individuals in the community making all the difference and the people making the difference, actually the SME supply chain is a foundation across the UK. And actually from that will trickle up. So if the SMEs are getting opportunities that the bigger ones are being ruled out of because they're not good enough or not advanced enough, then I think that's the way we need to do it. But we sell the message of these are our procurement routes. If you want to access this, and we will enable you to access all the public sector procurement routes in the future, by this, then we can enable that to happen.
Thank you, Joe. Has anybody else got some ideas from a more sustainable business perspective on potential certifications or examples that they have to share, local or otherwise, that might be inspiring to the group? Maybe not at this moment, but again, I think there's a real point here around examples of lots of different certifications going on. B Corp is one example where increasingly we're seeing this movement of businesses seeing the value in not only being sustainable, but communicating their sustainability effectively. So I'd really encourage people, if that space is something you're interested in, to look at, for example, B Corp in the UK, or once you start going down that rabbit hole on Google, there's a lot of other certifications specific to, for example, hospitality industries that are seeing more take up. And then through their consumption decisions, you might actually be more targeted in who you choose to work with or use as part of your supply chain. Neve, I don't know if you wanted to.
Yeah, just because I've realised neither of them are on the call anymore, but that just to put a highlight on the work that Rewired Earth are doing, very much kind of around that, in terms of they're trying to their mission is to change the market kind of for good, in terms of rewiring the market so that people are driven by kind of mission and social value as opposed to profit. So yeah, again, another kind of interesting sort of organization to look at around that kind of business engagement side of things.
Thank you, Neve. And on that note, we have reached 4 o'clock. I have no doubt we could all probably stay on here for another couple of hours, but I'm sure everybody has places to be. Thank you all so much for joining today's session, for inputting with your questions, for listening, and hopefully you've taken something away. At the very least, I definitely do recommend that everybody checks out the work that the young leaders have been doing on the One Planet website. It's all readily accessible, and actually only the beginning of the story, it sounds like, because the team will be out at Parliament next year, really communicating quite heavily the importance of this manifesto and what needs to be done, not only through conversation, but through tangible action as well. So again, thank you, One Planet team. Thank you to our speakers. Thank you everyone for joining us, and we hope to see you all again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Great work, guys.
Thank you so much.